And just like that, the Democrats killed crypto and gave Gary Gensler more power. Don't believe me? Watch the hearing yourself.
The question is, will the House on reconsideration pass the joint resolution, the objections of the President to the contrary notwithstanding? The gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. McHenry, is recognized for 1 hour.
Mr. Speaker, for purposes of debate only, I yield the customary 30 minutes to the gentlewoman from California, Mrs. Waters, the ranking member of the Committee on Financial Services, pending which I'll yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days within which to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous materials on the veto message of H.J. Res. 109.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of overriding President Biden's veto of H.J. Res. 109. It didn't have to be this way. It did not have to be this way. On digital assets, on the regulation of digital assets, on the functioning of a new asset class that a substantial number of Americans and in the world are using a new set of technology. But the Biden administration has been given every opportunity to work with this Congress on digital asset policy and to come to a reasonable conclusion on digital asset policy. In May, Congress passed a resolution to overturn the Securities Exchange Commission's SAB 121 with broad bipartisan support in both the House and the Senate. And a lot has changed since that time. Following that vote, the House passed historic digital asset market structure legislation called FIT 21 with an overwhelming 2/3 support of this chamber. In divided times, a vote like this in this chamber is a substantial statement of the validity of that policy. That means that 71 members of the President's own party voted for that bill. Today's vote should mirror the support of FIT 21, given that this policy change was also in that legislation they voted for. SAB 121 is one of the most glaring examples of the regulatory overreach that has defined Chair Gary Gensler's tenure at the Securities Exchange Commission. It limits consumers' options to safely custody their digital assets, upending decades of bank custody practices and increasing concentration risk. This is real consumer harm that is now in the marketplace because of the rules, because of these rules that Gensler has put in place. Congress used the mechanism available to us, the Congressional Review Act, to overturn this harmful so-called guidance. To be clear, a bipartisan CRA sends a strong message. A bipartisan Congressional Review Act vote that passes both chambers, well, that's a mandate from the Americans we represent. Despite all the recent progress and bipartisan agreement, President Biden vetoed the first digital asset-specific legislation that ever passed the House and the Senate. It's never been clearer. This administration would rather play politics and side with power-hungry bureaucrats over the American people and over new technology and the safe use of new technology. So I urge my colleagues to support today's resolution, overturn the veto, and take a small step to bring sanity to the American digital asset policy landscape. And I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentlelady from California is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I'll yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentlelady is recognized.
I rise today in opposition to H.J. Res. 109, which, if passed, would undermine the Securities and Exchange Commission's ability to protect people who buy cryptocurrency. Today, Republicans want to override President Biden's veto and block the SEC from setting accounting standards for companies that hold digital assets like crypto on behalf of their customers. This resolution is part of a long list of efforts by industry and its allies to attack the good work of the SEC, which has made significant progress in protecting investors, maintaining fair, orderly, and efficient markets, and facilitating capital formation. Preserving the power of the SEC to protect investors and our markets is now more important than ever, especially in light of the recent Supreme Court ruling in Loper versus Raimondo, which by overturning Chevron deference has now undermined the authority of the SEC and other federal agencies. The SEC Staff Accounting Bulletin, SAB 121, is an informal guidance intended to clarify confusion raised by market participants. One prong of SAB 121 that would be repealed by today's resolution is about giving the public disclosures to increase transparency about these crypto assets. This kind of transparency helps prevent the kind of fraud and mishandling of crypto that led to the collapse of companies like FTX and a dozen other crypto firms that were handling and safeguarding customers' assets. The second part of SAB 121's guidance advises companies to record crypto assets as liabilities on their balance sheets and to ensure those liabilities correspond to the fair value of the crypto assets they are obligated to safeguard. This ensures that the company providing custody has sufficient resources to secure these assets for the users against any loss or misuse. The SEC has explained that this guidance is prudent due to the unique risk and uncertainties associated with crypto assets. These risks include hacks, theft, and technical failures. SEC's guidance simply says a firm that safeguards crypto assets on behalf of customers should account for these unique crypto risks by recording these assets on its balance sheet as a liability. These safeguards would be completely undermined by passing H.J. Res. 109. The crypto industry and its allies have long chided the SEC for not providing enough clarity over how crypto assets should be regulated. However, SAB 121 directly addressed industry's uncertainty. It's just that the industry didn't like the answer they got. Should H.J. Res. 109 come into law, it would not only eliminate SAB 121's helpful guidance, but it would also permanently block the agency's ability to do anything substantially similar in this area in the future. One special interest group representing large custody banks has provided the SEC with targeted modifications to SAB 121, which would avoid the sledgehammer effect of this legislation. So I understand that the SEC may be close to reaching an agreement on these modifications, which would ensure that well-regulated entities like custody banks can offer crypto custody services consistent with SAB 121. Nevertheless, despite the fact that this issue will soon be moot, Republicans are pushing ahead anyway with this blunt and overly broad approach. So I urge my colleagues to oppose this veto override, and I reserve the balance of my time.
California reserves. The chair will receive a message.
Mr. Speaker, a message from the President of the United States.
Mr. Speaker.
Madam Secretary.
I am directed by the President of the United States to deliver to the House of Representatives a message in writing.
The gentleman from North Carolina is recognized.
I yield myself such time as I may consume. Look, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to ask the ranking member to yield there's this rumor that has been going about that there's some resolution at the SEC with a group of banks, and they're going to let certain banks custody digital assets, and some deal that's being made. I have no details of it. The first public pronouncement of this I heard from the ranking member, and I was just wondering if Mr. Speaker, if I could inquire of the ranking member if there's paper on this or any published accounts of what the ranking member said. I'm happy to yield to the ranking member. I'm interested that this deal that you've talked about, that certain banks can custody digital assets, and there's a deal made with the Securities Exchange Commission. The first I've heard of this was the pronouncement the ranking member just made. I was wondering if there's any published account of this or anything in writing we have from the SEC.
If I may, to the gentleman.
I'm happy to yield.
Yes, thank you. As I said when I made the presentation, that they're close to working out the deal with SAB and the custody banks.
Okay. Well, Mr. Speaker, I would just say I appreciate the ranking member yielding. The idea that Congress is going to wait because you have banks trying to get a special carve-out for themselves from Gary Gensler and the SEC, that's not sound public policy. And the idea that Congress is going to wait and pause on overriding the president's veto of really bad policy that harms consumers just because we have a rumor that two people are talking or 10 people are talking, that's not the way a great state should do business. A great nation state, the best capital markets on the globe. We should not be doing business this way. We should have clarity under law that people's financial assets are going to be protected, and they're going to be protected in a resilient regime, which we have for securities, we have for commodities, and we should have for digital assets the same protections we have for these other financial assets. And we don't, because the actions of Gary Gensler and the Biden administration that have said you can't hold these assets in custody. And so it's made it more risky for consumers to own digital assets. And so, look, let's reject this idea that we just wait for a couple people to strike some private deal for a group of banks. Let's make this correct. Let's make it right for the American people. And let's vote to override this veto. With that, I'd like to yield such time as he may consume to the gentleman from Nebraska, the author of the original bill that the president vetoed that we're now voting on again. The gentleman, Mr. Flood from Nebraska.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Chairman, I want to thank the chairman for his leadership on this issue. I feel like we should start with the definition of custody. It's that basic, folks. Banks hold others' assets in custody, and they don't put them on their balance sheet. This is an example of Mr. Gensler at the SEC using a staff accounting bulletin to keep banks out of digital asset custody. This is the first time this resolution went through Congress. The first time this resolution went through Congress, it received, as the chairman said, bipartisan support from both the House and the Senate, including Majority Leader Schumer. Think about that. Majority Leader Schumer broke with his own party, with his own party's president on this issue. The reason for that support, and it's really simple, the SEC got its hand caught in the cookie jar. They overstepped in a blatant way that runs contrary to its obligation to protect investors. What is the SEC doing in banking policy? Somebody ask the Federal Reserve, ask the OCC, ask the Treasury Department. Do they think this is right? Look at the testimony in front of the Financial Services Committee. SOB 121 is not a political issue. It's simply a bad regulation. No matter what your feelings are on cryptocurrency, the SEC shouldn't be writing bank custody rules, and they definitely shouldn't be overstepping their authority to do it. And now on this floor today, we hear from the ranking member that there's some private deal with a couple of banks. And to the chairman's point, that's not good public policy. That's amateur hour. That's trying to avoid the embarrassment of having the House of Representatives vote like it did on FIT 21, where better than 2/3 majority were in support of this very policy. Finally, let's be clear. SOB 121 is bad policy that affects the entire banking system. not just one bank or one small group of banks. If the SEC wants to fix this problem themselves, they should rescind the bulletin for every bank in America that's publicly traded. One-off agreements do not fix underlying problems with this fatally flawed legislation. I urge my colleagues to support this measure, and with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from North Carolina reserves. Gentlelady from California is recognized.
I now yield 5 minutes to the gentleman from California, Mr. Sherman, who is also the ranking member of the Subcommittee on Capital Markets.
Gentleman from California is recognized for 5 minutes.
Let me address the Democrats in this chamber and say sustain President Biden's veto. This is the worst possible week for Democrats to do anything else but to stand behind President Biden's veto. If you vote the other way, then you can explain to the press that you repudiated the president's decision, that you voted to override a presidential veto, something I don't think we've done in a long time, because you had extensive conversations with Paul Munster, the chief accountant of the SEC, and he was unable to convince you that Staff Accounting Bulletin 121 properly lays out, for generally accepted accounting principle purposes, which assets should be on the balance sheet. You can then discuss with them how you also commented on a host of other accounting principles that put assets on the balance sheet that are not actually owned but might be leased or held by the company on whose balance sheet they are listed. You can then discuss with them your personal views on accounting theory and try to convince them that you repudiated the president because of deeply held concerns on what assets should and should not be on the balance sheet. But they will not listen. They will tell you you voted to override a presidential veto this very week. Now, we are told that somehow this is going to prevent banks from acting as custodians. It does not, because we have 3 accounting systems in this country. We have tax accounting, which is separate from GAAP, or generally accepted accounting principles, which are for disclosures to investors. And we have a third accounting system for regulated companies, particularly banks, called Regulatory Accounting Principles, or RAP. This pronouncement doesn't deal with RAP. Banks are free to do what they want. They must inform their investors what they did, and then the investors can decide whether that bank is one they want to invest in. Now we're told that we should override AB 121. Well, what effect does that have? Not only does it take crypto off the balance sheet, it prevents the chief accountant from writing another regulation or staff accounting bulletin requiring footnote disclosure. So then you'd be voting for no disclosure to investors of the very significant risk of holding these crypto assets. You can argue for balance sheet disclosure. You can argue instead for footnote disclosure. But if you vote today for no disclosure in the financial statements, that is a repudiation of all modern accounting theory. So let us, if you, I do want to point out, as the ranking member has, that there are substantial risks to banks in holding crypto assets. And Sam Bankman-Fried's fraud is just one of many in the crypto world. So this disclosure is necessary for investors to decide what risks they are taking when they invest in the stock of a bank. So in summary, if you believe that crypto assets that the bank is holding as a custodian should be on the balance sheet, vote no. If you believe that crypto asset risks, the risks that the bank has by acting as a custodian for crypto, should only be disclosed in the footnotes, vote no. And if you have no deeply felt opinion on when generally accepted accounting principles should cause assets that are being held by a custodian or lessee should be on the balance sheet, should be in the footnotes, or should not be in the financial statements at all. If you don't have a deeply held personal belief on this technical matter of accounting, vote no and sustain President Biden's veto. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from California reserves. Gentleman from North Carolina is recognized.
Myself such time as I may consume. Look, I would have to address this, Mr. Speaker, because there's a lot of gibberish that I've just heard about this vote being an endorsement of President Biden or something like that. And I don't want to get into that debate. I don't. And the question of whether or not the president cares about the veto or is going to look through the vote count on this day or whatever else, or the politics of what's happening in the hallways here with all my Democrat colleagues being asked about the president. And I'm trying to withhold from opining about those things. And I see in press reports that the president's really dialed in between 10 and 4, and this vote being at 1 p.m., perhaps he's going to look at the vote total, perhaps. But that's all conjecture, and I don't want to get into the conjecture of this stuff. It's not part of the decorum of the House here. The substance here is about digital assets. And what we've shown in this chamber with a 2/3 vote, 71 Democrats joining with just about every Republican, saying we want a market structure so we can develop the next generation of internet technology here in the United States, have consumer protection, safety and soundness ensured, that we can have the best capital markets on the globe and capital attracted from around the globe here in the United States so it can be deployed safely. And then cutting-edge technologies and digital assets, just as we have this debate on AI. We voted with a 2/3 vote to have a regulatory regime that looks like our capital markets for crypto. And my colleagues, after 21 voted to repeal this stupid this ill-fitting, ill-designed, poorly thought out accounting standard that says crypto is not a real asset and we're going to treat it as this other thing, so it can't be in regulated finance. We had 21 Democrats vote with us to repeal this rule. Then we had 71 Democrats vote for a full market structure for crypto. So I would say those 50 Democrats who voted on the larger regulatory package on crypto, look at this anew. And if you want to send the message that you're pro-crypto, you want to send the message to your voters that you're pro-crypto, and you want to protect their assets, those 50 that voted for the market structure but didn't vote for this should vote with us. We should have a 2/3 vote of this House to repeal this ill-designed accounting standard. This is not a marker of presidential leadership. What we've heard from this administration is all over the map on what they want to do with crypto. And now they're contorting themselves as the election gets closer. And so let's just do the right thing. Let's support sound policy. Let's override this veto. Send a message that America will remain the best place in the world to deploy capital and the best cutting-edge technology with consumer protection and law-abiding rights connected with those digital assets. So with that, I reserve the balance of my time, and I would say to Madam Speaker, I'd say to my colleague, I'm prepared to close, but I reserve the balance of my time, and we'll close.
The gentleman reserves. The gentlelady from California is recognized.
I yield myself such time as I may consume. No matter what is said, this is about overriding the president's veto. My colleagues argue that SAB 121 undermines the investor protection by discouraging crypto firms and other entities from providing custody services. However, the numbers show this couldn't be further from the truth. According to figures provided by SEC staff, at least 10 U.S. firms are already offering SAB 121 compliant crypto safeguarding services. As of the end of last year, they were safeguarding close to $210 billion worth of crypto assets in a SAB 121 compliant way. This just goes to show, despite all their talk that SAB 121 will lead to less companies wanting to safeguard crypto assets. There are indeed plenty of firms out there that are doing so in compliance with the staff accounting bulletin. Can I give him 1 minute? I yield to the gentleman from California, 1 minute.
The gentleman is recognized.
This resolution is terrible accounting policy and has nothing to do with whether banks are allowed to act as custodians, since it has no effect on bank regulation, no effect on the calculation of their capital, no effect on regulatory accounting. This resolution deprives investors of the knowledge of what risks the bank they're investing in is running. It says you can't put it on the balance sheet, on the theory that nothing should be on the balance sheet unless it's owned by the entity whose balance sheet is being filed. Anyone familiar with lease accounting knows that that is not the basic principle that is carried out with an awful lot of assets that are listed on the balance sheet. But it goes further. It says not only can't the chief accountant and the staff accounting bulletin require disclosure on the balance sheet, they're prohibited from doing another regulation and disclose it in the footnotes. This is terrible accounting policy. Vote no.
The gentlelady from California.
If the gentleman has no more presentations, I will close at this time. Thank you. Madam Speaker, I have no more speakers, and I'm prepared to close if the gentleman from North Carolina has no further speakers. He said he does not, and so I will proceed to close. I yield myself the balance of the time. I strongly urge my colleagues to vote no on this effort to override the President's veto of H.J. Res. 109. If passed, Congress would block the SEC from providing much-needed and timely clarity to our markets. We would also be preventing the SEC from ensuring companies that hold crypto on behalf of Americans take the necessary care to ensure those holdings are transparent and accounted for. For all of their hand-wringing about the lack of regulatory clarity in the crypto space, it is baffling to me how the industry wants to make it harder for the SEC to use one of the primary mechanisms it has to provide clarity around crypto, staff guidance, and accounting bulletins. H.J. Res. 109 is a sledgehammer when what may be needed to address concerns is a scalpel, CRA resolutions, as these are referred to, not only overturn the agency guidance that is the subject of the resolution, but also prevent the SEC from issuing any substantially similar guidance in the future. In essence, even if the SEC wanted to offer clarity around crypto custody, in the future they would no longer be able to do so. If Republicans want to address the issue previously raised by custody banks, they could have done that, but now they have put forth a bill that causes broad harm not only to the SEC, but all the people and companies that rely on the agency to maintain safety and stability. I call on all my colleagues to vote no on this dangerous measure, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentlelady yields back. The gentleman from North Carolina is recognized.
I yield myself the remainder of my time. I want to submit for the record a letter supported from the bank trades, the American Bankers Association, the Bank Policy Institute, the Financial Services Forum, and SIFMA, that represents the securities industry in banking, in support of the vote to override
without objection.
A lot's happened since the original vote in the House in May. A lot's happened. You have an asset class that more Americans own than ever before. You have a new technology being deployed that's going to be the backbone of the next generation of internet technology. You have Europeans establishing a standard and clear rules of the road for crypto and a regulatory regime there. You have clear standards in Japan. You have clear standards in Singapore, the Middle East, even Hong Kong. Clarity and rules of the road for crypto. We had a 2/3 vote in support of clarity for crypto and a full regulatory regime for digital assets, like we have for securities, like we have for commodities, like we have for banking in the United States. Clear rules of the road. Best-in-class set of regulation for consumers, for those that are creating the technology, that are deploying capital, for the users of this technology. And I know my colleagues, the two colleagues that are in opposition to this veto override that have spoken on the other side of the aisle, they voted against that regulatory regime. And they're with part of their party. But I would say the wider vote we need to look to. 2/3 of the House voted for a regulatory regime for crypto, clarity for crypto. We had 21 vote for this original bill coming out of the House, 21 of my Democrat colleagues. Then it went to the Senate, and an interesting thing happened in the Senate. We had 12 senators, Democratic senators. Senator Wyden, Lujan, Booker, Kelly, Casey, Hickenlooper, Rosen, Tester, Peters, Sinema, Gillibrand, Senator Gillibrand, who represents the capital markets of the United States, New York, and her colleague, New York Senator Schumer, who also happens to be the Democratic leader, the majority leader in the Senate. So I'd say to my Democrat colleagues, this is not an unsafe vote to override this president's veto. It is a very safe vote for you to say to your constituents, I'm pro-crypto, and I'll stand up and do the right thing for clarity for crypto. We should have a wide bipartisan vote. We should override this veto. We should provide clarity under law. We should do this for consumer protection, and we should do this to be best in class in the world for digital assets. So I ask my colleagues to support this veto override. Vote yes. And with that, I yield back.
Without objection, the previous question is ordered. The question is, will the House on reconsideration pass the joint resolution, the objections of the President to the contrary notwithstanding? Under the Constitution, the vote must be by the yeas and nays. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings on this question will be postponed.
And just like that, it was over.